into a lockdown as a result of the coronavirus pandemic. Governments are battling hard to try and deal with the situation. A global effort is on to limit the damage caused by COVID-19. On this edition of The Big Picture, we will analyze the global situation and India's role. Joining me on the program today are Kavita Narayan, public health expert, Aditi Tandon, special correspondent of the Tribune, and Ashok Sajanhar, former ambassador. Thank you, all of you, for joining me on this edition of The Big Picture. Ambassador, let me begin the program with you. First, let's take a look at, the global situation and what efforts are on really to try and deal with this situation.
Well, over the last several weeks, I would say that beginning March or so, or maybe second week of March, because I think it was around the 12th of March that the World Health Organization declared this COVID-19 to be a pandemic. Earlier, it was, emergency of international concern. That is what it was being mentioned in January. It had been mentioned like that. But in March, it was declared as a pandemic. And since it has been declared as a pandemic, I think the intensity of this particular disease has become clear to the whole world, and they have been trying to deal with it. Now, of course, the World Health Organization is supposed to coordinate the efforts in dealing with this particular issue. But so far, what we have seen is that all countries are dealing with this at their national level. From our side, I would say that as far as Prime Minister Modi is concerned, he has been trying to bring countries together. His first initiative was to get all the SAARC countries together. There was all the leaders of the SAARC countries met, except for Pakistan, where it was the advisor to the Prime Minister who had participated. And after that, he set the ball rolling when it was senior health officials and advisors who got together. Then Prime Minister Modi was also instrumental as far as getting the G20 to have a meeting amongst them. And they also had a discussion. So I think that was a good discussion, although in terms of the world coming together to deal with this crisis, it didn't really come up with any very significant outcomes, except for what the Prime Minister Modi had mentioned there, that we need to look at the reform of the World Health Organization. This is an issue that has been in front of the international community for quite some time. Nothing much has really been done about it. And we have seen that WHO has really failed to cover itself with glory. It has been found wanting in many respects as far as the current crisis is concerned. Sure. Then we know that Prime Minister Modi has been reaching out to all, several of the world leaders. The last one was his conversation with President Donald Trump of the United States. Before that, he had spoken to President Putin, the President of France, Emmanuel Macron. Then also recently, he spoke to Scott Morrison, the Prime Minister of Australia. So I think across the board, he has been touching base, basically two or three issues, focusing on two or three issues. Number one, transparency. Number two, best practices. What are the different countries doing? What is it that they can do to work together, to collaborate? But so far, the efforts have been more at the national level, but they need to be more now at the regional and at the global level.
Absolutely. All right. Taking the discussion forward now, Kavita Narayan, as far as, India reaching out is concerned, the ambassador has very rightly pointed out that the Prime Minister at the highest level has reached out to several heads of government, heads of state as well, to try and talk to them about best practices and how to deal with this pandemic as a whole. But at a government level, is there any kind of collaboration maybe between health officials, between scientists to try and get a vaccine, started for the coronavirus pandemic or COVID-19 in particular? Or what is the kind of collaboration that exists or that we would like to see?
Thank you, Frank. That's a great question. And, I call Corona sort of the great unifier in a way, right? I mean, while we also might be, all sort of trying to close borders and, sort of really all stay inside, in a way, I think it has been unprecedented in this world that for the first time, at least after 100 years, because the last pandemic we know of that happened was 1918, the influenza pandemic. that sort of, shook the world. And for public health, it's a big learning. But this is the only next time that where we can see where truly, the world being one, it has never been sort of more relevant. And as literally you can see the wave of this disease progressing, as it progressed from China and then kept going on, went into Europe, the US, and then finally India, we were really very, very, obviously we did a lot of very strategic things. But I think we also lucked out because we've been able to manage to flatten that curve, which is really what in public health, for us is our core strategy, is to flatten the curve and help give the health system time enough in order to sort of this massive pandemic. So it's amazing that if we were not open at all points to sort of, what China did, what Germany did, what somebody else did right or wrong, we really will not be able to. In fact, we would have had probably, in my mind, way greater number of deaths if we were all not sort of open to it. So I think the world being a flat place today has helped us more than ever before, because we have been learning. In fact, our AIMS doctors, they are looking at what the Chinese doctors have been putting out their information, or sort of some of the strategies they did. People from Iran, people from Germany. We have never had more collaboration, I think, globally in terms of trying to understand and learn from each other, learn from probably the follies of somebody, learn some of the best practices and use it as this disease is actually sort of making a progression through the world. So I think it's a great lesson in sort of not dividing, but sort of uniting as a globe to fight the pandemic.
Okay. Aditi, as far as best practices are concerned and learning is concerned, what is it that India has learned, as far as this particular virus is concerned, from the world, and also basically how we have responded to what's happening here, looking at what's happened in, say, for instance, Iran, what's happened in Italy and in France, or for that matter, even the UK and the US?
Frank, let me put it the other way around. Let me say that this time India has shown the world how preemptive, proactive action can actually delay the onset of the disease outbreak in any country. For instance, when the outbreak was at its peak in China, and China, as you know, employed a very radical strategy of quarantining entire cities. This was the first time in the history of pandemic control and management that any country had actually locked down full cities as a measure of controlling the pandemic. And it also showed that it was working. India, as you know, started evacuation of its citizens very early, sealed its borders very early. But the immediate learning that India took was from China, where this kind of social distancing had already started reaping benefits from the public health front. So India moved extremely quickly to seal its borders, extremely quickly to order the thermal screening of incoming passengers, especially from China and Hong Kong, and then kept on adding several countries to the list. This actually gave us a long gap, as Kavita was mentioning, for the health systems to prepare and the disease to get staggered. So the level of quarantining that India is currently practicing is something that the world is now talking about, because you see what has happened in Italy, what has happened in the US is late reaction by governments to actually grasp the seriousness of the issue. For instance, let me give you a very small statistic. Whereas India had started screening incoming passengers much before the WHO even declared the COVID outbreak a public health emergency of international concern. We started screening our passengers on January 18, and the public health emergency declaration from WHO came much later on January 30. And as the ambassador was pointing out, the pandemic declaration came even later. But India did not wait for signals from the WHO to actually start taking preemptive action. So in many ways, India has shown the world how quick thinking on the feet can actually help prevent a mass infection from spreading in a community. For instance, India is the second most populous country. Frank, if we had not taken these preemptive actions, you can imagine what could have happened. We are a very densely populated country, very closely living communities, and the infection rate, as you know, the reproductive rate of this virus, as tested by the Chinese scientist, is that one infected person has the potential to spread the infection to 3 people. And then at the community level spread, what happens is, suppose you have 4,000 cases nationally, in a matter of days or maybe hours also, this infection could go 3 times, 4,000 to 12,000. And that is the kind of exponential infection rise Italy saw, Germany saw, and also the US is now seeing, and UK, as you know, is already seeing. So India more than learning from the other countries, learned from China that social distancing is the key to beat this particular virus and buy time. And that's exactly what we have done. And
Sure.
also, let me point out that India is also very quick to join a lot of international collaborations when it comes to experimentation on drugs. For instance, India's apex medical research body, the Indian Council of Medical Research, announced last week that India is going to join the WHO Solidarity Trial, which is currently underway to test the efficacy of 4 drugs and their combinations. So this is the first such trial, a cross-country trial, multi-country trial, in which India has already started participating now that the caseload in the country is increasing. But again, let me put it like this, Frank, even WHO Director General has repeatedly in his press conferences through Geneva, commended Indian government's immediate response. Of course, we have lacked in mass testing capacity. Now, there is this issue of test kits, and we are trying to procure those test kits. We are a huge country. We do not have enough test kits to test the population at the community level.
Right.
So India did adopt a limited testing strategy of testing only recent travelers and contacts of recent travelers which were showing signs of COVID-19. We have not yet started testing people in the community. That is one thing we need to do urgently, and India is already on the job to procure a number of test kits for serology tests from across the world.
Okay, all right. So we made best use of the available resources is what you're suggesting. On this issue of drugs, Kavita, I'd like to bring you in. The world is looking to us, especially the United States, looking to us to supply some hydroxychloroquine, if I got that right. And how else can India really help the world? Because this is something that the world is looking to India towards.
So again, very valid point there, Frank. So again, I think I'll applause there to Aditi for some of the very important points that she was able to raise. In terms of some of the preemptive actions that India had already done. So one of the things that we're also doing, particularly from a drug strategy, is ensuring availability of all of our essential drugs. Now, this is particularly important, and I'll get to the point of what India can do for the others. But I think it's important to know, Frank, that this is a disease that has, in addition to just, if it's a normal person, the average person who's, let's say, healthy, who gets a corona, their outcomes are very different from those that have comorbidity. So if you are a diabetic, if you are hypertensive, if you are a stroke patient, cancer patient, if those patients, and we remember have a large burden of those, of NCDs, of the non-communicable diseases, several chronic conditions, if those with chronic conditions actually get afflicted with corona, that's when the outcomes get, really poor. So for us, the key is to ensure not just the basic drugs to actually handle corona itself, but also to ensure that the other drugs are in good supply, which means that we can keep our people healthy during the lockdown, make sure they have an adequate supply of all of their regular drugs, because we want them to be healthy if at all the corona catches them, so that it leaves with the normal precautions. So that's an important strategy that we have adopted. As I'm sure you're aware, China, India, we are some of the countries that are looked at as some of the major drug manufacturing sites in the world. So therefore, obviously, everybody's looking at us, and looking at what is it that we can do. However, I think India has been this time very, very strategic, as well as very clear in saying our first priority is going to be for us to secure whatever we need for our own citizens. As we all know, we are only the number 2 populous country here after China. We need the chloroquine, the hydroxychloroquine as prophylaxis for our own, for our health workers. I mean, we have more than 7 million in the health workforce. Our health workers are our primary priority in making sure that they have prophylactic access. Then we also need the azithromycin, which is the other major drug of choice, which is the antibiotic. So for all of these, our strategy has been to ensure that there is adequate supply of these for our populations, particularly for our vulnerable populations. And then, of course, as you know, sort of what happens with APIs, etc. Obviously, there will be talks again of saying how we can make sure that we also reach out to other countries that are looking at us. But our priority for sure as a country right now is to ensure that our availability and our stock is taken care of.
Absolutely. India first, and then we can look at the world as well. And we can play a major role really as far as supplying some of these crucial drugs are concerned to the rest of the world. And that's where we can come in. We've already sent out a message in ensuring or teaching the world about how we can handle a situation such as the coronavirus pandemic. Talking about China, Ambassador, many people have called it the virus that originates from that land. But we haven't done that. In fact, we are working with China as well, because the need of the hour right now is to try and deal with the situation at hand, and everything else can wait for a later date.
Yes, but the later date needs to come and should come at the appropriate time. At the moment, it is that we have to work together. And it's not only India, Frank, it is the world, because we can see that the economies of all countries, major powers, you mentioned the United States, countries in Europe, whether it is Germany, France, Italy, Spain, all of them, United Kingdom, all of them are suffering as a result of that. And the economies have taken a hit because of this, whether it is curfew, whether it is social distancing, whether it is lockdowns. The industries are not functioning. And on the contrary, China was able to limit this the spread of the Wuhan virus only to the Hubei province by adopting such draconian measures in terms of keeping the lockdown there very, very strict. So its industry is working. So it is supplying whatever is required, whether it is face masks, whether it is thermometers, or it is testing kits to the world. Of course, there have been reports that the quality of this has been rather suspect, very doubtful quality. I think those are some things that need to be looked at. But going forward, once we have been able to deal with it, once we have a medical solution to the coronavirus, once we have developed a vaccine or something of that nature, as far as this is concerned, then I think we need to come to accountability also, because why is the world suffering in the manner in which it is? Because it was China which refused to accept and acknowledge that this is a new strain that has come, and it was known to it in sometime around the middle of November, and it came out to the world only around the end of December, beginning of January. So if it had come out with all the details and all this information, I think the world would have been much better prepared. And the research in terms of what it was, what the virus was, isolating the strain, the genome, trying to find a solution, I think that would have started much earlier. You look at, and here also, as I mentioned earlier, the WHO has been found wanting. The WHO, the Director General, has been parroting only what China has been telling him, and he has been heaping praise on the Chinese leadership. I think going forward, there has to be some accountability. And maybe, just to finish off, I would like to underline and emphasize India's own record in this just 2 years ago, when we were afflicted by the Nipah virus, and how within 2 days we went to WHO and we said that this is a new strain, we have to work towards it, we have to work towards controlling it. And all, what happened in terms of isolation, in terms of quarantining, in terms of finding a cure for that, we started right away. China made the world lose more than 1.5 months, about 50 days. And the world is suffering because of that. So going forward, I think definitely China will have to be held accountable for what it is, for its acts of omission and commission.
Okay, all right. So talking about medical solutions, Aditi, I was reading somewhere about herd immunity or a vaccine, so is this the only way out really as far as medical solutions are concerned to the problem at hand? Because herd immunity also is going to take a lot of time, and vaccine also, if you look at the history and how vaccines have been developed, it's going to take at least 18 months to 24 months.
That's right. It's a very, very tricky situation across the globe, Frank, and all top minds in the research world, all political leaders have now got together to fast track trials. And as you know that clinical trials are already on, and a vaccine trial is already on under the WHO. And now, as I earlier said, drug trials are also on. And herd immunity, I agree with you. Whether herd immunity is something that nations can experiment with, because for that, perhaps countries like India would have to relax lockdown conditions and, let the virus spread and see whether the communities actually develop antibodies to fight this virus. But is it a risk worth taking? Is the question that public health experts are currently debating. Well, if you look at the infection rate of the virus, it is not giving time to people, Frank, and it is causing a lot of casualties, and especially in the elder population. The analysis across the world has shown that the more damage on the mortality trends has been done to the older people, the 60 plus population already come with pre-existing disease burden of diabetes, cardiac issues, hypertension, and chronic kidney disease. And now it is beginning to show, for instance, if you take Indian condition, trends are also indicating that 30% of around 111 deaths that we saw until yesterday happened in the age group 40 to 60 years. And a lot of these young people who died also came with pre-existing disease. So whether you actually have time to experiment with herd immunity, I'm not too sure. Experts will be able to debate that. But fast tracking vaccine trials is going to be extremely important. And as we know, the US has already begun a lot of studies on that front. And an interesting study that some Australian researchers are currently doing and some US researchers put out last week was the possibility that nations where communities have been vaccinated with the BCG vaccine, which is an anti-tuberculosis vaccine in India, which we have been giving in our routine immunization program from 1950s, if I'm correct. Kavita can point out if I'm correct. Gives some kind of immunity to people who have been administered the BCG vaccine. But trials are required to conclusively prove whether that is true, because if you look at the WHO regions, Frank, the data analysis is very interesting. Right now, as of yesterday night, I was looking at the figures, around 12 lakh cases in 208 countries and more than 64,000 deaths. Now, among these 12 lakh cases, 6 lakh cases are in the European region of the WHO. Around 3.52 lakh cases are in the Americas region. And then you have the Pacific, and then the Asian region is in Africa and Southeast Asia region are reporting the lowest number of infections. Why is that so? Perhaps the experts should look at that. Is there some kind of immunity in these populations existing towards this viral strain, which a lot of researchers are still trying to understand how this virus is behaving? With Nipah, with earlier viruses like the Middle Eastern strain that we had of the coronavirus, and earlier the H1N1, we were quick to find vaccine solutions. India, in fact, was quick to even produce an indigenous vaccine for swine flu. But we are not able to get a grasp of this virus. But why is it so that the Asian region, the Southeast Asian region, is reporting somewhere around 11,000 cases, if I'm correct, across the world, and lesser mortality? That is something that the researchers should look at and explain.
Right. Okay. All right. Time to get closing comments now on the program. I'm going to ask my guests to be brief. So starting first with you, Kavita, with the best way forward.
Wow. I think I'll just very quickly, the study of epigenetics, just to sort of answer some of those points that Aditi said, what the role of genetics and how it plays with certain genes, with certain viruses in the communities. Globally, the study is going to be very, very important for us as we develop a solution for vaccine. Because clearly that's what the patterns are showing variances in the various regions of the world. So studying that in addition to temperatures, geographic locations, various other factors. So this is a multi-pronged, multi-variable study that we'll have to do before we actually understand how this virus behaves and actually coming to a solution for it. And globally, coordination and communication and absolute cooperation is the only way for us to understand how to move this forward.
Okay. All right. Ambassador?
Well, Frank, I think cooperation, collaboration, both at the international level, at the global level, as also domestically at the national level, I think that is the need of the hour. What we are doing so far, what we have been able to achieve so far, I think that is very creditable. That's very commendable at the national level. We need to continue so that, we are able to flatten the curve and to bring down the intensity so that in terms of community transmission, it doesn't take place. So togetherness is the need of the hour. We should not be complacent. We should not be reckless. We should not be adventurous. At the same time, there is no need to be to panic or be paranoid about it. I think if we go about our work as we have been doing at the national level, I think this is good. We should be able to control it. At the global level, yes, work together at different levels. The reform of WHO going forward, I think, will be very, very important. That was the theme on which the current Director General had come to office when he was elected in 2 years ago in 2017. I think that is an agenda that we need to take forward, both at regional, at global level, and also at the level of WHO.
Okay, all right. And Aditi, close the show for us with your concluding remarks.
Yeah, I just want to say, Frank, that let us believe in our own country's capacity to show the world that how this pandemic and its rate of infection and progression can be slowed down. WHO has already said last week that India had led the way for eradication of smallpox, eradication of polio, very deadly diseases, and India is gradually showing the way in delaying the onset of community transmission in our country, such a huge country, where countries like Italy and the US actually saw community transmission within 20 days of the first infection. India has now delayed community transmission stage, and it's the 60th day of our first infection, which came in on January 30. So I think our government, our people together can show the world the way of how to deal with this pandemic.
Absolutely. I think you hit the nail on the head there with your concluding remark. India has shown the world a lot, and India has shown the world the way to deal with this particular pandemic. C cubed. Cooperation, collaboration, communication. That's the best way forward as far as the world is concerned. With that, it's a wrap.